whichever one of you is going to guide the conversation for us.
That sounds great. Thank you, Rachel, for kicking us off. I might as well speak first from the team here. Like I said, name is Josh Potter, transportation engineer with Hennepin County. We're here tonight to talk about further Lyndale Avenue and safety improvements coming to Lyndale Avenue this year. I'm going to ask and see if I have share. Oh, I do have sharing capabilities here. Hold on a second. Let me pull up my slideshow. It's switching screens on me. Hold on a second here. All right, here we go. All right, so as noted here, talking about Lyndale Avenue, just wanted to note, John and I here this evening, as well as introduced with Joy and Bridget as well. There's our nice black and white photos. Just want to go over just kind of a high level overview for us. Just want to kind of talk about just transportation goals for the city and county. Just kind of talk about some background data that we have available for Lyndale Avenue, focus on the safety improvements. As we go, certainly we'll pause for questions as they come up. And I cannot directly see the chat or see people raise their hands. So if there's a question, appreciate you letting me know. Just want to hit on the goals first. Really kind of the biggest piece of these goals. Want to focus just for both City of Minneapolis and Hennepin County is a couple of items. First, a focus on all users, as well as focusing on safety and livability. So certainly we know that some challenges with Lyndale Avenue, and so working towards goals to make improvement there. We also have included in that as well goals in terms of climate action and taking steps to be more responsible, of course, with our planet as well. And then the city and county kind of term them differently, but they're about the same. One's Vision Zero, one's towards zero deaths, but a focus on eliminating fatalities on our transportation network, as well as injury accidents, particularly focused on more people who aren't in the steel cage, but people who are walking, biking, using transit, etc. So at this point here, going to just pass this along to John and let him continue talking about the background data for Lyndale Avenue.
Thanks, Josh. And good evening again, everybody. Thanks a lot for letting us come along to share what we have on the project with you. Josh is sharing his screen and I'm looking at notes and the video, so I do apologize if we have to shuffle things around if we stumble on that. I hope that won't happen. But we're going to run through some of the project background information and talk a little bit about the purpose of the project. So as Josh mentioned, the pilot project will be piloting and evaluating the soon to be implemented 3-lane configuration on Lyndale Avenue. And from a technical standpoint and also public input standpoint, we're trying to evaluate all of the before and after changes with the configuration. So we've been out doing some data collection and analysis of things. So we'll be walking through a bunch of these things here in the next few slides. So we have some interesting facts that we're sharing in terms of the traffic volumes. We have the vehicle traffic, transit ridership, bikes and peds, and safety information. So that's maybe the next 4 or 5 slides that we'll roll through those. So the first one up is the traffic volumes. So each of these slides, we have a handful, and North is up on each one of them until we get to a couple of visualizations. But the traffic volume ranges somewhere between 22 and 30,000 cars or vehicles per day. That's cars, trucks, buses, motorcycles. And then the transit ridership is somewhere in the range of 2,000 up to 2,700 on the north end. And then the next slide up, Josh, is the walking on Lyndale Avenue. So similar to the maps that we showed, north is on the right on these graphs as well, with the addition of Aldrich kind of straggling on the left side there. So blue is the north-south volume, so people that are walking on Lyndale Avenue, and the greenish yellow is the east-west crossing Lyndale Avenue. So you can see a couple of spikes. 22nd Street seems to have the most volume on Lyndale, and either Lake and 26 seem to have the highest crossing volumes, kind of topping out around 1,200 people a day. And the biking volumes, the numbers are a little bit lower than the pedestrian volumes, but you can see kind of the same format on the chart where the blue is north-south, kind of peaking in the neighborhood of 24th Street, and then east-west peaking around Lake Street, with each of those topping out at about 140 bikes per day. And this was from our data collection that we did last October, so it was not the dead of winter. School would have been in session, but granted, this was during COVID, so the fall of 2021. So we have some other historic data that we'll be including in some of our detailed analysis. So hope you're not concerned that we're doing this just looking at some COVID information. So then the next slide, Josh, the crash data. So Lyndale Avenue, or Lyndale and Lake, has some of the highest pedestrian crashes in the city. This map shows the crash data from the last 10 years. And it shows the injury crashes are red dots. So the small red dots are any kind of injury reported crash. And there's a big red dot at 26 that was a fatality that was in 2019. The shading shows the total crash density, with red being the most dense. Generally, that happens at the intersections. And then it's less dense in blue in between the intersections. So that's, I think we can move on to the next one. Please feel free to chime in if you have any questions or if I miss anything you're interested in. So then the next couple of slides that we're going to talk about the projects, sort of, how did the project get to this point? Why are we doing the project? What are some of the goals and what's our schedule? And then after that, we have about 6 or 7 slides that shows some project details. So why is it a pilot project? So there's a high traffic volume on Lyndale Avenue in this complex corridor. So that second bullet talks about the fact that it's kind of beyond the guidance of where we would implement a 3-lane cross section, but this is an attempt to address safety concerns, and at the request of neighborhoods, we're going to consider the 3-lane cross section. So generally 18,000 vehicles per day would be the cap that would be typically considered for a 3-lane cross section. And with this corridor getting up near 30,000 cars a day, we're quite a bit over it. So there will be some challenges, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Project evaluation will allow an opportunity to collect feedback before the permanent decision is made. And so we'll be working with the community to present what's happening coming up in June, but then also solicit feedback when it's implemented. So I think we're on to the next slide, Josh. So some of the goals, we're looking to make the project a success, and we hope to try to define what that means going into it. So some of the key things that we're looking for is safety, access, and then community engagement in terms of feedback and response to whether it's functioning the way that people had hoped, and if you're experiencing what you might want out in the corridor. Some of our feedback that we'll be responding to appropriately may merely include communication with people about what's happening or what they're seeing, or potentially some of our feedback might actually result in actual physical changes out in the field, depending on the magnitude of any impacts that we might be finding. So we'll be identifying key challenges and solutions, and implementing these goals and defining the success project, and to determine whether the pilot should be permanently implemented. And actually, I think I get to this a little bit later, but maybe now is a good time to point out that the corridor is being reconstructed and anticipated in the year 2025. And so this pilot project is hopefully a lead into permanent construction that would incorporate this 3-lane cross section. And then if there are any modifications that might be needed to make it a little bit better as we learn through the pilot project. So on the next slide, we talk about the JUL, and on the left side, we've been doing data collection and design of the restriping of the corridor. We did a whole lot of data collection of traffic and crashes, bikes and peds, and analysis of traffic operations. We'll be using some of that traffic analysis to incorporate into the signal timing in the corridor for some modest tweaks. So here we are, where it says April to May, just starting the community input and advertising the project. In June, we'll be out implementing the project. I think it's only about a 2 or 3 day effort to restripe it. Josh, did I get that right? Wasn't it? It was way less than 2 weeks. It seemed to me I remember 2 or 3 days of essentially kind of moving construction to resurface the road and restripe the paint. Is that about right, Josh? So then after it's restriped in June, we intend to at first wait for the traffic to settle out a little bit. The users out in the corridor will need several weeks in order to get accustomed to how it works, and some people may be looking for different routes, and it may take a couple of weeks for that to settle out. And so then after we've given that duration of settling, we'll go back out this fall and do the same data collection that we did last fall for traffic volumes, bikes and peds. And we'll also be looking at crash data to the degree that we can. Granted, up until today, we have 10 years of crash data. And then once the project is implemented, we'll only have a short duration to really evaluate how the crash situation might be changing out there. So we'll be doing those things and then sharing those results next December. So then I think we're getting into some more of the project details here. Just some general overview notes of the project. It'll be restriped from the 4 driving lanes to 3 driving lanes. So it'll have 1 travel lane in each direction with a center left turn lane. And we have a couple of images of what that looks like come up here shortly. Generally, there won't be any change to parking. And that is one of the goals, to not change parking at all. And to my understanding of all the design that we've been doing, there actually is not a single change in parking. The transit stops will remain in similar locations. There may be a few minor tweaks, kind of working with Metro Transit to make sure that we do what they might like if there are any changes that are necessary. And then the next slide kind of talks about some things that we've been considering as a part of the project. What is that impact on street parking, which generally is none, turn lanes, bus operations, transit, pedestrian crossings, and then safety for all users. How will residents, businesses, property owners, and users be benefited and impacted? A few positive things that we're seeking and anticipating with the project include safer and easier crossings for people walking and rolling safer vehicle speeds with dedicated turn lanes, reduced crash severity. And that's an important distinction, is that we may not necessarily see a reduction in overall crashes, but we do anticipate a reduction in severity. No impact parking. And a note on crossings and safety. The way it is out there right now, the way people drive, they're often busy looking over their shoulder, trying to figure out how to change lanes, speeding up, slowing down. And with the new 3-lane configuration, it should be a lot more calm, where people that are in the through lane will be focusing mostly just on the car in front of them. So much more safe situation, better speed control. Then some impacts that we would anticipate as a part of the project, but we're working to minimize these impacts. There will likely be some increased delay for traffic and vehicles. There might be some lines and backups for traffic at signals. There might be some gaps between vehicles where previously you could pass them, but that'll be a part of the future condition. We're looking at the use of side streets and other project areas. You know, does this impact other parallel streets? Are we chasing too many people away because they can't get through here fast enough? And is that good or bad? So those are all things that we'll be evaluating through our analysis. So then the next slide shows some of our, I don't know, I get my notes here, sorry. Some bird's eye views. So here's a perspective view of the existing conditions at 27th Street. And that purple mural on the side is Planet Soccer. I'm going off of Street View, so if it's changed, I apologize. In there you can see the 2 lanes in each direction with parking on both sides. And the next slide is the exact same view with our 3-lane road sketched in. And coincidentally, this is where that pedestrian crossing and median closure is being constructed right now. So you can see the 1 lane in each direction. The right turn lane is painted here such that that right turn movement will come out of that 1 through lane. And then you can see the center left turn lane, which in the immediate vicinity of this drawing. Sorry, I was still talking about 27th. In the immediate vicinity of the 27th Street drawing, there aren't too many side streets, maybe an alley and a small parking lot, but it does give the ability for cars to pull out of that through lane to make their left turns. All right, now Josh, can you move on to the 28th? So just another example of what the corridor will look like. This one's slightly different than up at 27th, whereas there is a dedicated left turn lane for the southbound left. And you can see that little buffer space between the southbound left and through. That kind of helps with visibility, so that if you have an opposing left turn coming at you, your view of the cars coming at you is not obstructed by cars across from you. You're kind of set slightly off so that you can see the cars coming at you to help you find that gap to make a left turn. And I think that is all the slides that I was going to present as far as the project details. Josh has some other schedule type of slides to go through here.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so appreciate the background data on what this project is about. So kind of talking next steps here, summer 2022, basically into spring of 2023, we're looking at, or I guess winter, spring of 2023, we're looking at evaluation. So, we really want to hear, once the pilot is implemented, especially hear people's feedback. We will be continuing to collect data, as John noted, everything from crashes to certainly, for example, we're very conscious of, are people going to start cutting through neighborhood streets? Garfield, Harriet, Aldrich, et cetera. So that's something that certainly we want to pay attention to. We necessarily we do not want to push traffic onto those streets. So that's another key reason why this is a pilot. Certainly document our findings from the data to certainly the feedback. One thing want to be key here as a pilot is if we do see a significant issue pop up with safety related, et cetera, being open to adjustments as well, figuring out next steps for those if something does come up, and certainly addressing those. And then in 2023, certainly the goal here is just the implementation of this pilot that's a success. We want a safer Lyndale. We want to maintain access to the businesses, for the residents, for the community, better certainly crossings across Lyndale. We want to identify any opportunities and challenges. And then after the outcome here, we'll be transitioning into more or less community feedback for, as John noted, we'll be looking basically between the Midtown Greenway and Franklin Avenue in the next 5 to 7 years is scheduled for a full reconstruction. So that puts that more or less in that, I'd say 26, 27, 28 timeframe. I should say rephrase that 2026, 2027, 2028 timeframe. Sometime in there for a full reconstruction, and that's from one side of the street, so from one sidewalk all the way to the other, a full rebuild. And so in 2023, we'll be taking the input from this pilot project, as well as continuing to have conversations with the neighborhood, with the community about this planned rebuild in the future. Want to just hit quickly here, just want to give an update on the safety improvements, just overall, particularly focused at 25th and 27th. But more or less just want to focus on at these intersections. We want to improve that crossing experience just because these don't have these stoplights or traffic signals at them. We want to increase that visibility for people walking and rolling at these intersections, and as well increase vehicular safety. This has been one of the key these two intersections have been key from a safety perspective. So last fall we did improvements on all 4 corners at 25th and 27th streets. Now basically within the next week or so, we'll be looking to get out and start the work in the center of Lyndale Avenue, constructing medians. They'll be putting in the pedestrian crossing beacons for pedestrians crossing across Lyndale. There'll be new striping. There as well will be new additional upgraded lighting at the 25th Street intersection. Just want to note, we have a virtual open house on next Wednesday, so a week from now at 5:30. Feel free to go to the website to register to attend. And that rounds us out for any questions.
I would say we don't have like a ton of people here today. Usually we have a raise your little Zoom chat hand, and we'll call on people as they queue themselves up to answer questions. But there's really only a few of us here, so speak up, I guess, or you can put your questions in the chat. In the absence of anyone else saying anything, I guess I can ask a question. You would, right at the end there, you mentioned that there would be upgraded lighting just at the 25th Street intersection, but it's recently come to our attention just how extremely poorly lit Lyndale is from Franklin to Lake. And we have a lot of crime issues on particular parts of it, which I know is not necessarily what your task has been, but certainly visibility with lighting will impact every single one of these intersections. So can you speak more as to like why lighting isn't a bigger part of this initiative?
Yeah, Rachel, that's a really good question. So certainly lighting is important, and it's a pretty substantial investment. This project is basically being it's being included in, so there's a pavement resurfacing going on Lyndale, and some striping paint changes and some sign changes. So the scope is pretty limited. Lighting is a pretty significant investment. So when particularly in that 5 to 7 year time frame, when we look at the full rebuild of Lyndale Avenue, that's when we will be looking further at lighting across the full Lyndale Avenue corridor from Franklin down to the Midtown Greenway, which would then basically tie into the existing lighting that's near Lake Street. So that investment is on our minds. It's a pretty significant investment that it'll take, and that type of work is typically done with those larger rebuild projects.
I guess that I just want to ask one more question on that. It is also my understanding though that the current lighting conditions on Lyndale do not actually meet county requirements for a thoroughfare of that degree, I guess. I don't know how I want to say that. Do you have any additional information on that, or can you confirm that?
Yeah, I guess I can say, Rachel, I'm not familiar with that with
Or
that
maybe it was a
requirement.
city requirement.
Yeah,
Those are city standards, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm sort of pressing on this, and this may or may not be the forum, just because we just have ongoing crime issues on Lyndale, and we're just trying to figure out how to best get a project like that prioritized. So, and we're so grateful that we obviously have a safety issue with pedestrians on Lyndale, and we're so grateful that we are getting this. Well, I'm speaking for a couple members of this committee who couldn't be here today, but that we're even getting this 4-3 conversion. So we're just always asking for more, aren't we? So
Rachel, just want to say appreciate the feedback. And one of the things about Lyndale is we certainly recognize there's no doubt everybody knows there's challenges with Lyndale. So like I said, one of the really big goals of us doing this pilot is we want it to be successful. And that's improving safety, improving livability. We know that at some of the intersections, I'll say particularly 25th, 27th, I mean, there's people who basically turned around and didn't even try to cross Lyndale, or would go they would walk out of their way to avoid crossing Lyndale. And so that's also as well why we're making those improvements at 25th and 27th.
For sure. I mean, I can speak from my own experience that there are businesses. I live on, the west side, and there are businesses on the east side of Lyndale that I don't go to around those intersections, because it's like, forget it. I'll just hit up Lynn Lake Brewery instead, so. Peter, you just raised your hand.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Josh, it's not quite related to this 4-3 conversion directly, but you mentioned at the end of your presentation that there's a full reconstruction slated in the kind of 2026, 27, 28 timeline. I was kind of curious about that, particularly in relation to the Hennepin project. Mm-hmm. I really liked your point about needing time to adjust to a change in a road to be able to relearn traffic patterns and get viable data for how a project's impacting traffic. I was wondering if the county is going to be coordinating with the city, because the Hennepin project will be completing in 2026. And if the Lyndale project starts in 2026, there's not going to be that adjustment time to get any really viable data on Hennepin. You'll just kind of probably overwhelm Hennepin a little bit as Lyndale traffic shifts to Hennepin during the project. And I was curious if there's any thought on that coordination of timing with the city, since those are county and city projects.
Yeah, Peter, you hit the nail on the head with your question, in that that's exactly why we're giving a range right now. We have been working with city staff. We're still trying. we know certainly, we've heard that Hennepin Avenue is being talked about through 2026. Seeing that there's such parallel streets, our intention would be not to have both streets under construction at the same time with a full rebuild. Certainly the residents, the community and the businesses, I mean, everybody needs to keep moving around to their homes, to their workplace, et cetera, and having both streets under construction at the same time, that would be a significant issue. And so we'll be working very closely with the city of Minneapolis to coordinate those two projects with the goal of not having them overlap. And if they do overlap, working hard to basically mitigate closures on those street lane reductions or closures, just to make one thing, like I said, is we don't want to push a bunch of vehicles, et cetera, into the neighborhood. So that's always big in our minds, is coordination of projects. And that's something that we've been focused on for a number of projects, not just Hennepin. We know that Bryant, Gerard, a number of the other, Franklin is also being talked about as well. So we know that there's a number of projects that we have to coordinate across the neighborhood here.
Yeah, and just one follow-up on there real quick. So again, great that the construction itself won't overlap, but I was wondering if there will be coordination of a buffer period post Hennepin construction, again, to get data on how traffic is adjusting to that redesign before another construction change impacts traffic flow on that road.
That's a good question, Peter. I don't have the answer for you on that today. Certainly we can talk further. I'd have to talk further as well with city staff on that too. So.
Thank you.
I think Regina, you put your hand up at the same time. Do you still have a question?
Yeah, I have a question about 29th Street, if there have been any conversations at all about any sort of improvements there. I regularly see a lot of people crossing there and between 29th and Lake. And it's obviously just a scary place. A lot of people stopping in the middle, waiting for cars to go by. So just wondering if that's been a topic of conversation, as safety improvements at 29th and Lyndale.
Is that about the location of the Greenway, Regina?
Yeah.
Okay.
Adjacent to the Greenway, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Regina, that's and we're just talking just south of the Greenway there, literally just on the south end of the bridge, the 29th intersection. Yeah, that's certainly another intersection that we've identified. Yeah, as a part of the pilot, certainly we'll be observing that intersection further. We know that today the intersection just has 2 yellow stripes of paint, which is very challenging. Having that center turn lane may make it a little bit easier to cross, but really as well, as a part of the planned improvements 5 to 7 years out, we will be looking a lot closer at what improvements we can make to provide better crossings too at 29th. So we will be observing it during the pilot. If we certainly see issues, we'll be working towards addressing it. But really we're looking at as well more of a, I'll say, hardscape fix or concrete changes, et cetera, to help people cross at 29th with that work 5 to 7 years out.
Sorry, are there any opportunities or possibilities for very cheap, easy treatments, like different colored paint or like plastic bollards, even to make that just a little bit safer as a crossing point?
That is particularly talking about the plastic bollards. That's something that we have been talking about and are working through further.
Cool. Thanks.
Hey, Josh, I have a couple of questions, just relaying from the community concerns that I've heard in this week, particularly around Lyndale at Franklin, heading southbound as vehicles are coming off the interstate or coming from downtown from the north end. I guess the question would be, what is the particular setup that's happening at Franklin and Lyndale, so that there's not so much of a bottleneck of traffic there? And then also, is there going to be any type of signage or anything like that that's to indicate this 4-to-3 conversion before people hit Lyndale? So I imagine this might be kind of jarring for folks driving on that, seeing that for the first time.
Yeah, Paul. Yeah, so in particular, Franklin Avenue, definitely we know that it's a busy intersection. Certainly challenging with in terms of being a pedestrian at the intersection as well. One of the things that we looked at early on was, well, we looked at essentially what should Lyndale Avenue look like at Franklin. Right now, we're proposing basically that transition down to the 3 lanes just south of Franklin Avenue. So the right lane would end about mid-block past the Franklin intersection coming south. There would be a northbound lane added just near the Franklin intersection. Main reason being in particular is we looked at reducing the number of lanes through that intersection, but the challenge of basically it pushes traffic back in towards 94 and creating safety issues there. So as you can tell, we're cautious on this. Another reason it's a pilot, just because we don't want to just do something here that creates larger problem elsewhere. In terms of the signage, we'll be implementing certainly right lane end signage when that lane drops to a single lane from 2 lanes to 1 lane, as well as typically when we do these projects, we try to put up the message boards to alert people that there are changes. There are changes basically in the corridor.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Oh, Peter, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'll hop back in. Could you say some words about the dreaded / despised left turn into the Wedge Co-op and how you see this functioning with a 4-3? Like, our car is going to like leave a gap so that left turn can happen. Is no one ever going to turn left into the Wedge Co-op? Is everyone just going to hate everyone who's trying to turn left in the Wedge Co-op? Like, is it the current case? Say more, please.
Yeah, sir. Peter, we all like the Wedge Co-op. That's a great question. So, and we're talking about, of course, off of Lyndale. So coming off of Lyndale to the access to the parking lot for the Wedge Co-op, there will now be a left turn. So that center left turn lane will be there to basically pull those left turning vehicles making their way to the Wedge Co-op out of the through lane on Lyndale Avenue. So very positive there. We're not going to get the situation that we have today, but those vehicles will be using that left turn lane as long as they properly use the left turn lane, but there will be the left turn lane there for people to pull into and pull out of the single through lane of traffic continuing southbound on Lyndale.
Do you foresee any issues with, is there a worry, I guess, about traffic backing up enough from the signal to block that access? Or is it modeling enough where it should be clear enough?
Yeah. And that's exactly, Peter, why as we approach Franklin Avenue going towards the north, we end up with 2 lanes through the Franklin Avenue intersection, because we were finding that blocking issue was creating issues for people going to the south as well. So, and creating issues further down Lyndale. So that's why that is, so by retaining 2 lanes going northbound, that'll allow for more gaps for people to make that left turn into the Wedge Co-op.
If I can add in another element to that, one part of the safety piece of that left turn lane is that currently, if you make that left turn lane, I mean, granted, you're stopping in the travel lane, but then when you make the left turn, you have to cut across 2 lanes of traffic. And with this new configuration, you'll only have 1 opposing lane of traffic to get across. Granted, the way the gaps are lined up will be different with that 1 lane. Currently, with the 2 lanes of traffic, you might have a scattering of cars in 1 lane and then the other lane, and you can't get across. Now they'll be in one lane, at least there are fewer places to look for cars, and it's a little more obvious with what's going on out there.
Regina, go ahead.
I have a question regarding the transition to 3 lanes means that each lane will be wider. So I am concerned, especially during times of less traffic outside of rush hour, evenings, stuff like that. Since the lanes are wider, drivers will be incentivized to, not necessarily incentivized, but will feel more comfortable driving faster. Has there been any consideration to how to mitigate that, make sure that the wider lanes aren't leading to faster speeds?
Yeah, Regina, one of the focus that we did was not to make the lanes wider for the through lanes. So basically, we end up with a little bit more space in that center left turn lane, and a little bit more space in terms of each parking area, of a foot or two kind of in each parking area. But that allows for us to maintain the narrow lanes that we want to try to keep those speeds down. The other piece of that is certainly we find in these 4 to 3 lane conversions that we tend to get that front car that more or less kind of sets the pace. So instead of getting more extreme speeds, we tend to see more speed moderation in these 4 to 3 lane conversions.
The one thing I would ask, and I'm eager to see how well to see if this all works. I'm hopeful. But I lived in Phoenix for a number of years, and we call those lanes suicide lanes because they tend to be where people will gun it to like get around someone who's being slow in the through lane. And then you end up with a situation where there's oncoming traffic, somebody coming in from the other way. And so my assumption is that like if this thing is successful and it becomes like some more permanent version of this thing, that we might be gaining some extra space that we can use for like planted medians or something that can help, again, sort of deter some of the things that Regina's talking about and the potential of a suicide lane kind of situation, and also help to create more pervious surfaces and greenery in the neighborhood, which would be, of course, a goal of this neighborhood. So for whatever that's worth, I just thought I should mention that. But I don't know if there's data around these combo turn lanes that would make me feel better about risking it out there that you might want to share.
Rachel, we definitely have no doubt have heard the term suicide lane before. Sometimes things get names for a reason because they happen. But I'll say certainly in our experience, at least at Hennepin County as well. I know talking to city staff too, we've seen quite a success in these implementations. That's one of the things that we'll be looking at as a part of the pilot. Is that lane essentially being used to pass other vehicles? And then as well be talking about what mitigations we may need to implement if that happens. But historically, we found that typically, and especially on a street such as Lyndale Avenue, when that center left turn lane is used as frequently as it is between all the business access and all of the each of the side streets, it ends up being pretty tough for people to use that center turn lane for passing. It's typically on those longer stretches when you don't have streets, you don't have driveways, which at times you see it I'll term it as suburban Hennepin. Some of them go pretty long stretches without any access. You may end up seeing more passing, people using that center lane to pass. But when you start to get a higher density of driveways and a good number of cross streets, it gets pretty challenging for a driver to start using that as a passing lane.
Okay, that's good thing to be aware of.
And there was the topic of the potential for plastic bollards too. So if there are specific places that become a problem, that might be a interim measure that could be used to help stop that.
Cool. I didn't see any additional questions come up in the chat. So and does anybody have anything else? All right, well, thank you all so much. We look forward to and please open invitation to be coming back to us with anything that you're learning and updates. We greatly appreciate that. So let us know as it moves along.
Just want to thank everybody for the time tonight, and certainly we'll be back more for further discussion. Thanks all.